Supporters of Senator Bernie Sanders held a news conference today in Philadelphia, voicing their disappointment with Hillary Clinton's selection of Virginia Senator Tim Kaine as a running mate. We also heard them talk about party rules and the possibility of a floor fight between delegates at this week's convention. This is an hour.
Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to this first news conference of the Bernie Delegates Network. By way of a little bit of background, the Bernie Delegates Network was launched by the online action group rootsaction.org, which I co-founded and coordinate. And Roots Action now has about 700,000 active members online. And the Bernie Delegates Network is ongoing in very active partnership with Progressive Democrats of America. And this morning we're going to hear from the executive director of that inside the Democratic Party major player in terms of progressive activism, organizing, and electoral work, Progressive Democrats of America, or PDA, Donna Smith. I'd like to open by just giving a bit of background of how the Bernie Delegates Network got to where we are now and where we anticipate we'll be going in the next few days. One thing that I think needs to be very emphatically emphasized is that the Bernie Delegates Network is independent. We're entirely independent of the Democratic National Committee and the Democratic Party. We're entirely independent of the Bernie Sanders official campaign. We have no working direct or indirect relationship or communications with Bernie Sanders or the campaign apparatus. From the outset, we've been independent. That's where we are now. That's where we'll continue to be. At this point, as I speak, we have 1,250 Sanders delegates in the Bernie Delegates Network. In other words, 2/3 of all of the delegates are in our network. Something else I want to emphasize is that the Bernie Delegates Network reflects. It does not direct. We do not tell anybody, we do not try to instruct any delegate what to do or what not to do other than our commitment to nonviolence. Well, what does the Bernie Delegates Network reflect today? We reflect disappointment and we reflect anger. We reflect a progressive commitment to continuing, as Bernie said the night of the California primary, continuing with the understanding that the struggle continues. And as he said that night in California, that struggle, that campaign for a political revolution that's meaningful, that's based on economic progressive populism and social justice, it must continue through this convention. Something that not only Bernie Sanders but millions of supporters have been clear about is that every meaningful measure of social change in our country has come from the bottom up. It has not come from the top down. And the hundreds and hundreds of active Bernie delegates who you're going to be talking with and hearing from every day here at the convention in one way or another totally grasp and embrace that principle. We're not waiting for elites to tell us what to do. We're not even waiting for our progressive or favorite politicians to tell us what to do. We're self-organized. We believe democracy comes from the bottom up if it's going to be meaningful for social change. And we understand that at this historic moment, out of necessity, the Bernie Sanders campaign is contracting. The campaign has had to shed many, many hundreds and hundreds of staff members. And by the very nature of the situation, the Bernie Sanders campaign per se is melting into something, you might say, a bit more general in terms of the fall campaign. Something else that I think needs to be greatly emphasized is that virtually every delegate in the Bernie Delegates Network has conveyed to us, and surely deeply understands, that by far, the worst candidate on the presidential ballot is named Donald Trump. And there's a deep and abiding desire and fervent belief that the defeat of Donald Trump, to keep him out of the White House, is absolutely essential for the future of our country and the world. Now, you may have heard just the latest poll numbers are very troubling about the number of Bernie supporters around the country who are inclined not to support the Democratic nominee. And it's troubling not because we're wild about Hillary Clinton, because we are not, but because in swing states that's very, very dangerous. And I have to say there's been an enormous amount of media spin coming from the Clinton campaign, echoed by all too many members of the punditocracy, that somehow we're told 85% of Bernie supporters are going to vote for Hillary Clinton in the fall. Well, that's contradicted by the latest polls. The latest polls show far, far fewer are committed to doing so. And it might dawn on some of the smartest guys and gals in the room at the DNC and Clinton headquarters that this precipitous dip in inclination to support Hillary Clinton in the fall among Bernie supporters might be related to the ways in which, in recent days in particular, Hillary Clinton, we don't know what's on her mind, we don't know what her internals are, but we know what her actions and behavior are. And this fall off in support is plausibly related to her demonstrable contempt for the progressive wing of this party in selection of Tim Kaine on the ticket. And one of the many, many reasons, but I think it's among the profoundly largest and most widespread reasons, that Bernie delegates here and reflecting supporters around the country are so upset about the Kaine pick is not only that it's the one thing that Hillary Clinton can't go back on later on, she's locked into her pick, but also that we believe, from what we understand on the ground, coming from all over this country, that the selection of Kaine will make defeating Donald Trump that much more difficult. This is an assault on the base, the progressive base of the Democratic Party that has, in the numbers of 13 million voters, flocked to supporting Bernie Sanders. And so those smartest triangulators in the room who have told us that the old formulas that prevailed a couple of decades ago at the top of the Democratic Party, that it's going to work again, they seem clueless about our current political environment. You have a handout with some documented information about just some of the issues that are just of such great concern: abortion rights, coal-fired plants, so-called right-to-work law that Senator Kaine has supported, the viciously anti-labor position, tax rates for the wealthy that he doesn't want to increase, voting, just one of a dozen senators to vote for fast track for the TPP. What kind of message is that? After all, well above 45% of Democratic primary voters went for Bernie. What's the message here? We want you in the party. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. Is that the message? We want you in the party. We want you in the room, but here's your hat. What's your hurry? What is this message coming from the party, from the top of the party? We, 10 days ago at the Bernie Delegates Network, did a systematic sample survey poll of Bernie delegates. And you have the results on paper there. We released this data 8 days ago. Not a surprise, not unknown to the Clinton campaign. What does it mean when 88% of the surveyed Bernie delegates said that they would find Senator Kaine, quote, unacceptable, unquote, in the VP slot? Only 3 saying they would find him, quote, acceptable. Well, this is a barometer of where we are today. And very briefly, before you hear from Donna Smith, the Executive Director of Progressive Democrats of America, I want to allude to looking ahead what we can expect in days ahead. We don't know what exactly to expect. That's certainly true of the Bernie Delegates Network. As I said, we will reflect and convey what the prevailing sentiment and planning is from Bernie delegates. We give no direction, but we will among delegates and help delegates to coalesce what most of them want to do. But looking ahead, most specifically, there are very serious discussions going on about a challenge on the floor to the vice presidential pick of Hillary Clinton. And tomorrow, as part of our daily briefings, we expect to have more information for you. This is part of a challenge to the corporatized Democratic Party under Hillary Clinton. In early June, as an elected Bernie delegate to the National Convention living in California, I went to downtown Square in Oakland, where 25,000 people, mostly young, certainly multicultural, multiracial, huge crowd, unprecedented, heard Bernie speak. And there was a sign that stood out for me ever since. It was hand-lettered. It said, "I refuse to accept a dystopian future." That's really what this struggle is about inside the Democratic Party and inside the country. Whether we will accept a dystopian future that gives only lip service to challenging human-caused climate change, whether we're going to give more than lip service to confronting the threat of nuclear holocaust when there's a $1 trillion with a T dollar budget plan through the Obama administration supported by Hillary Clinton for so-called modernization of nuclear weapons, and finally, more broad-based, perpetuating a situation of massive oligarchy, dominance of our economy and politics, and the middle class falling through the floor, and rampant poverty as well. So just to sum up, no to a dystopian future. We've got to defeat Donald Trump. We've got to challenge the corporate power in the Democratic Party represented by Hillary Clinton today. And at this point, I'd like to introduce to you the Executive Director of Progressive Democrats of America, Donna Smith.
Good morning. First of all, for those of you who were at the Rules Committee yesterday, if we had needed a bigger room, we would have moved today. But we didn't. My name is Donna Smith. I am the Executive Director of Progressive Democrats of America. We have chapters throughout the country. We are proud to say that here at the convention, more than 220 delegates 220 Bernie delegates identify themselves as Progressive Democrats of America. We like to say we are the insurgency in the Democratic Party. We are not an official part of the Democratic Party. And when we came here, I think it's important to mention that most of our delegates, many, had to raise significant amounts of money to arrive here at the DNC. And they did so not because they expected to come and be foot soldiers for anyone who espoused views that were not theirs in terms of what they heard from Bernie Sanders that drove them to so fervently support him over the last 2.5 years. Progressive Democrats of America in late 2013 issued a petition where we asked people to sign if they wanted to urge Bernie Sanders to run as a Democrat for the presidency of the United States. We gathered thousands and thousands of signatures that were presented to Senator Sanders at Northampton, Massachusetts on our 10-year anniversary in May of 2014. Senator Sanders did not obviously make the decision at that time, and there were many people who urged him and influenced him to make the decision to run for president. And Progressive Democrats of America has never before endorsed a presidential candidate. And the reason is simple. We are a federal PAC, and we support progressive candidates who are in line with the issues that we find important to achieve through the Democratic Party. Among those issues are those that Hillary Clinton has assured us that she does not share with us. And so it's very difficult for us at this point to imagine that we will make a smooth transition of any kind, and we likely will not be able to endorse Hillary Clinton as president. Now, that is not to say that people in Progressive Democrats of America want Donald Trump to be president, and I want to be clear about that. We will shift our work to working for the down-ballot races and congressional races where we really feel we can make a difference and give a more progressive Congress to whomever ends up being the president, whether that has to be in opposition to a Republican president, which sounds pretty awful to us, or whether that be to push a president who is not progressive to be more progressive. As an example, we'll take one issue, single-payer health care, Medicare for all. And the reality is that not too long before the convention, Hillary Clinton assured people that single payer would never, ever come to pass in the United States. That's a difficult thing to swallow for Bernie delegates who look at this situation that's happening in our healthcare industry today and what's happening to millions and millions of Americans who cannot afford their own health care. They may be paying exorbitant health insurance premiums, but they're not achieving access to health care. So that's one of our primary issues. And we've heard over and over again that the platform committee of the DNC has passed the most progressive platform in the history of the party. While that may well be true, that it's more progressive than previous platforms have been, it's still left a long distance between what Bernie espoused in the campaign trail and what is in that platform. Those of you who were in Orlando or watched the Orlando hearings, the platform committee hearings, you know how hard fought they were. And sometimes we can feel as Bernie delegates as if unless we are to just toe the line and be quiet and go along with what the Clinton campaign, and as we know via WikiLeaks and beyond, the DNC appears to have wanted, that we will not be included in the conversation. We feel that here at the Democratic National Convention is absolutely the appropriate place for us to argue out these issues in a democracy. That's what a democracy is all about. It is not inappropriate, it is not disrespectful, it is not disunifying for us to argue and find out what the best possible ticket we can put forward to this country is to tell people that this is the direction Democrats feel the country should go. That's why the vice presidential pick was extremely upsetting to many Bernie delegates. It wasn't just that it was Senator Kaine, and in most part it's not directed personally at Senator Kaine. It's directed at what choosing someone who is so far away from where we stand progressively said to all of us who have worked so hard on Bernie Sanders' campaign over the last 2.5 years, given up months and months of their lives and volunteer support, thousands, many people, thousands of dollars. I know Bernie was very fond on the campaign trail of talking about those $27 contributions average. Trust me, for many families, that was a lot of money to put out every month, and they did it lovingly, and they did it because they were committed, not just to Bernie the person, but to the ideals of progressive change in this country. That included protecting our climate, We have an emergency. We have a climate emergency in this country. And unfortunately, Senator Kaine has exhibited a great fondness for the oil and gas industry and for fossil fuels that makes us extremely uncomfortable. Unless we join together and mobilize to deal with the climate emergency, this issue is going to consume so many of us going forward and damage the lives of future generations forever. There's no turning back from some of the climate emergency. I've heard Russell Green, who is a member of Progressive Democrats of America and offered a sweeping climate emergency amendment at the platform committee, talk about he believes there's a 10-year window for us to take action. If Senator Kaine is the vice president and he's advising Secretary Clinton or President Clinton on what she might want to do, we are very concerned about what will happen with climate. So climate, health care, the stand on peace and war, very difficult. This is a very difficult choice. There were two tangible ways that the Clinton campaign and the DNC could show Bernie delegates and Bernie voters across the country, 13 million of them, that they cared about where they stood. Those two ways were platform and the choice of vice president. And in both cases, having disdain for those positions that are held by Bernie delegates does not bode well for the future of either the ticket or the Democratic Party long term. We've all heard about the millions and millions of young people who came out to vote for Bernie. So true. They were inspired not only by his talks about college debt and having free public education, they were inspired by seeing a world where you did not have the billionaire class and the millionaire class ruling over the rest of us and telling the rest of us what to do. They were inspired by something that gave them hope for the future. And the choices that we're making now at the DNC, they're also sending a very strong message to those millions and millions of young people, many of whom who have already said, that's it. I'm done with the Democratic Party. And for the Clinton camp and the DNC to disregard those comments from our young people is done at their peril and done at all of our peril if what indeed we're doing is empowering somehow Donald Trump to be the President of the United States. So with that, I want to thank you all, and I think we'll take questions. Right, Norm?
Very briefly, a couple of points that we're going to go to questions. One is, I left out a word when I spoke, when I mentioned that Senator Kaine had voted against TPP fast track. I left out the word Democratic. He was one of a dozen Democratic senators to vote in favor of fast track to expedite the TPP last year. Also, just very briefly to note that we've been getting a tremendous number of questions, we might get one or two today, about protest prospects on the convention floor. One of the things we wanted to emphasize here is that there's a panoply of reasons why there's such a likelihood of protests by Bernie delegates on the convention floor. And because of the live broadcasts involved here today, I will repeat your questions before Don and I endeavor to respond to them. So, yes?
How many members of this coalition support what you're talking about, a new challenged, a new vice presidential nominee, and what's the process? How far are you in the process for actually forcing that on the floor? Because at the RNC, what we saw is protests that were easily stopped by the person holding the gavel.
Yes, the question of how many in the Bernie Delegates Network are tuned to perhaps protesting conceivably about the VP choice and so forth. When we surveyed 10 days ago to Bernie Delegates Network members about potential VP choices, and of course we included Senator Kaine there at that time, one of the questions toward the end of the survey said, if the vice presidential pick of Secretary Clinton is either Kaine or some of the others we listed, or similar political outlook, would you seriously consider vocally denouncing the pick and or, as we called it, nonviolently and emphatically, that was the term, nonviolently and emphatically protesting during the acceptance speech of Secretary Clinton on the convention floor. And the vast majority chose and/or, either said one or the other or both. So that's a basic inclination. The other part of the question, what do we plan now? We're going to be very quickly doing yet another straw poll, and by the way, it's done so that every delegate has a unique URL, can only vote once, but we are going to be surveying within the next 24 hours exactly what plans the delegates might get behind in terms of responding.
Well, I mean, that's the plan, but the procedure for doing this, do you know the procedure for doing this yet, getting enough votes, how many votes you need, how to do it?
Oh, you mean officially within the DNC? Well, we've read the rules, and of course we would hope that the rules would be followed. I mean, what's theoretical, the neutrality of the DNC was theoretically in existence throughout this campaign. We now know through the email leaks provided by WikiLeaks that was a total fiction. So I say that the caveat, but when we read the rules of the DNC and this convention, if we gather 300 signatures with no more than 50 from any particular state, then we can place in nomination the name of a vice presidential potential nominee, and then we would go through that entire process. Donna, did you want to add anything?
If Bernie asked you to step
people
down.
should identify what news outlet they're with.
Yes,
Sure.
please.
Robin with the Omaha World Herald in Nebraska. If Bernie should ask you to step down and to stop your protest on the VP pick, would you?
The question is if Bernie Sanders would ask us to, as you put it, step down and not protest the VP pick, would we? Well, the answer is very much bound up in my explanation in the beginning that the Bernie Delegates Network is totally independent of Bernie Sanders and the campaign. Let me make it very clear that as a coordinator of Bernie Delegates Network and also every other delegate I've talked to who's a Bernie delegate, none of us have ever heard from Bernie Sanders or any of the official campaign that they want us to protest or that they don't want us to protest. If we get such a message, directly or indirectly, I'm sure we'll take it under advisement as we take all advice and opinions under advisement, no more or no less. Donna, did you want to respond?
In terms of Progressive Democrats of America, now I'm not speaking for the Bernie Delegate Network, put on my other hat. The Progressive Democrats of America have no intention of standing down at this point. We brought Bernie Sanders to this party, so to speak, and we intend to be there. I think that Bernie was very serious when he used the hashtag, and we all use the hashtag, not me, us. We take that seriously. He talked about this is about building movement. And for those of you who may have been there, we had a fabulous People Summit in Chicago a few weeks ago, in which we had thousands of people come together for just the purpose of movement building. We had a fantastic sponsorship by National Nurses United and 190,000 registered nurses in this country who came together to say it isn't about Bernie Sanders the person, it's about a movement, and it's about justice, it's about making sure we achieve the progressive change we want to have. Bernie has been a tremendous vehicle to bring that agenda to the American public, and the American public has embraced it, really embraced it. And we always stood that way for Progressive Democrats of America. We intend to continue. I think in terms of the vice presidential pick, we do know the process. To answer more specifically, there has been outreach to specific individuals about their willingness or non-willingness to put themselves in that light. As you might imagine, there is often fear of retribution. And I think that's very real, unfortunately, in our political system today. Certainly we see the most egregious examples of that on the Republican side with Donald Trump, when he very directly threatens people and the press and others on what will happen if they don't sing the tune that he wants sung. The DNC may have its own ways, as we're finding out through WikiLeaks and so forth, and so there may be fear on the part of some people, but rest assured there are people who are unafraid. Thank you.
And briefly on that note, this prefigures the future. If there's a President Clinton and a Hillary Clinton administration, there's not a nanosecond of honeymoon because principals don't take a nap, they don't go on holiday. So this prefigures what we anticipate in the future. Yes.
Hi, Sally Kipp with Hearst Television. If you could talk a little bit about what a floor protest would look like, what are some of the options?
The question is, talking about a floor protest, what some of the options are. Well, Donna may want to address this as well. We've heard many possibilities discussed by delegates. Again, our delegates network is reflecting a lot of that discourse going on. There's talk about walking out of the vice presidential or presidential acceptance speech. There's talk about total silence, remaining seated, turning backs. It's all a quest to galvanize and walk in the footsteps of the long tradition of nonviolent protests for social justice in this country. I'd like to mention that in 1964, at the Democratic Convention in Atlantic City, the Democratic administration in the White House tried very hard to suppress the voice of somebody who had suffered from social injustice. And the rationale was that that would hurt the party and help to elect Barry Goldwater, just as we're hearing similar rationales today about we should sit down and shut up because that will help Donald Trump. On the contrary, the help of Donald Trump is coming from Hillary Clinton in choosing someone who is actually backing up the Wall Street support from the Democratic Party that's such a target for Trump. But back in 1964 in Atlantic City at the convention, when we look today at the voice of Fannie Lou Hamer, who said, on behalf of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, we didn't come all this way for no 2 seats, when the racist delegation of the regular Mississippi Party was to retain all of their dozens of seats. Very few of our delegates have suffered the terrible abuse that Fannie Lou Hamer did at the time as a civil rights activist in the Deep South, but there's an understanding that you have to sacrifice, and sometimes when the top of the party tells you to be quiet, it's important to let your light shine, it's important to speak up and speak out, and in the light of history that is upheld. Yes, other questions?
Are you also
yes.
considering floor fights?
Could you identify yourself, please?
Catherine Dosey with the Associated Press. Are you also looking at floor fights on rules, on platform, or protesting anyone else who's in attendance?
The question is, are we also considering floor fights in terms of rules, in terms of platform? Well, late yesterday, the Rules Committee, after a lot of deliberations, seems to have come up with a quote-unquote compromise which might obviate or remove the need for a floor fight. That remains to be seen around superdelegates. In terms of platform, there is no minority report as far as I'm aware that's been formally put forward. At the same time, there are efforts underway. I don't know if, Donna, you want to address that as well, around climate issues and so forth. In terms of what a floor fight might entail, again, we're committed to nonviolence. We're committed to the long tradition of activism that speaks out for social justice, and that remains to be seen. We're going to continue to poll and survey our members.
Thank you, Norman. I think the other thing that's important to say is if the protest that developed outside the Rules Committee yesterday is any example of how Bernie's delegates will be handled during this convention, the DNC has some work to do. They're talking about unity. They're talking about wanting us to be a part of what they want to do moving forward. And yet the delegates, for those of you who were there, may know the delegates, Bernie's delegates at least, seem to be isolated. And they said the room was full, and the room was indeed crowded. But it's hard to imagine when you have Hillary Clinton supporters in line who appear to have gotten preferential treatment in getting into the room, and then you have 150 people outside the room who are predominantly Bernie Sanders delegates and supporters just wanting to be in the room to observe the votes on superdelegates and do some really considered and careful work in consideration of this party's rules. And those people are not only held there, but there was a growing police and security presence. No one was being violent at all. They were making noise. They were chanting. They were wanting to make it clear that they wanted to be in the room. They wanted to be moved to a bigger room. We made it clear that shame on the DNC for not having provisions for disabled and elderly people who were standing in that line. You better be walking your talk during this convention. And, you know, that was not a good showing, a good start yesterday in terms of how they handled the Rules Committee. So will we have actions on the floor? I think there probably will be some. It's not, again, I want to stress what Norman said. It's not up to the Bernie Delegates Network to tell anybody what to do. Certainly we'll poll and find out what people are thinking.
Donna, Homie Rose from Rose. It's been reported this morning that Debbie Schultz, DNC Chair Debbie Schultz, will not be speaking at the convention. Is that enough, or would you like to see the removal of Debbie Schultz as the DNC Chair?
Well, I think, you know, I said it yesterday in a couple of interviews. The question is about whether Debbie Wasserman Schultz should be removed as the chair of the party. I think I said it yesterday in a couple of interviews that if we just look at our own professional lives, and you had a situation in which in your professional life you had written emails like that about people with whom you were supposed to show impartiality and deal with professionally, you might imagine that would have severe consequences to you professionally. So my understanding this morning is that Debbie Wasserman Schultz will gavel open and close the convention, but she will not have a speaking role. No, that's not enough. I mean, to my thinking, it's not just Debbie Wasserman Schultz that was involved in the situation. It appears that there were several staff members of the DNC who were involved in saying some very inappropriate things, very partial to Hillary Clinton things about Bernie Sanders, and there needs to be accountability for that in the party. It's important. This is a democracy. This is not a production show here in Philadelphia. This is the seat of our democracy here in Philadelphia. It's a wonderful place for us to really exhibit that, but it won't be if we are squelched and we are silenced.
Let me very briefly say that in this situation, at this historic moment, the onus for party unity is on Hillary Clinton. And it's a bit much to be told that you Bernie delegates had better snap to it for party unity when we got the shaft by, if anything, her going to her right away from the principles of the Bernie campaign in filling the vice presidential slot. Yes.
Nancy Ryan, WFLA TV in Tampa. At almost every public appearance, Secretary Clinton brands herself as a progressive. Is she?
Question is, Hillary Clinton brands herself as a progressive. Is she? Well, it depends on the definition. You know, if being an exponent of the basic policies and preferences of Wall Street makes you a progressive, if being endorsed by Robert Kagan, one of the leading lights of the neoconservative foreign policy, saying that she is a neocon, but of course her followers won't call that, if that makes you a progressive, if somebody who has stood firm against the necessity for reducing, in concrete policy terms, the gaps between the rich and the poor, and on, if we're going to move the goalpost to that extent that Hillary Clinton is a progressive, then the whole game is down the rabbit hole. Yes, in the corner.
Hi, Ben Sales, JTA. What's your response specifically to the WikiLeaks that DNC planned to question Bernie Sanders' Jewishness and attack his belief in God?
The question is, what is a reaction to the WikiLeaks revelations of the DNC emails about planning to use Bernie Sanders' religion and asserted atheism against him? Well, sadly, it speaks for itself. This is the Progressive Democratic National Committee. I mean, it's just shameful. Yes.
This is on Hillary Clinton and party unity. What could she do at this convention, or what could she do this week that would satisfy you?
Well, I think that she's clearly damaged party unity to a large extent by her choice of Kaine in particular. What she could do now is to open up the convention to actual debate over platform issues. The survey that we did among Bernie delegates really tracks with the weaknesses that she has had in her purported progressive politics and her fidelity to Wall Street. We had by far the top number, somewhere around 69% of the delegates responding to the survey, and this was close to 300 of them in an overnight poll, said that the Trans-Pacific Partnership is the most important issue to bring to the floor. And yet Hillary Clinton has, even though she claimed to have turned against the TPP, did everything in her power and successfully blocked that provision to challenge and condemn the TPP from coming to the floor. So she's done that. So she should reverse that. She should allow there to be an actual debate over the TPP. Excuse me. At the convention, on the convention floor, there should be a debate. There should be a vote on platform provisions. I think it was Ben Jealous, who's the former head of the NAACP, who at the platform committee meeting in Orlando a couple weeks ago just added one sentence after talking about concerns on economic justice, international trade. That is why we opposed the TPP, was his proposal, and that was voted down on orders of Hillary Clinton and her forces. So not only a TPP issue should be allowed by Hillary Clinton to go to the floor, but two other issues which ranked very high among our delegates in the survey: single-payer Medicare for all, that should be brought to the floor. There are so many delegates who have been struggling and fighting to bring it to the floor. Hillary Clinton's trying to block it. She should reverse course on that. And the third one that ranked very high was an all-out government mobilization on climate change to recognize the global national security by any real definition threat that climate change is to humanity. And again, the Clinton forces should reverse course and allow that platform fight to come to the floor. Did you want to add anything?
One more issue that I've heard talked about in choosing Senator Kaine as the running mate was that perhaps there was some deference being given to making sure the white male vote did not go to Donald Trump more so than it might go to the Democrats. I found that remarkably ill-informed about many of the white men that I know about what they believe and what they would like to see happen with this country. And I also, there's a certain sort of sexism in that. I also would like to say, and I know I've heard many women Bernie delegates say this, and I want to say this emphatically. I would like to see a woman president in my lifetime, too. Very much would like to see a woman president. And I had hoped that would mean that we would bring a different kind of dynamic to politics, perhaps. A different kind of more open thought process, more progressive, more peace-oriented, more oriented true change for our future so that our children had things to look forward to, and so that we had some things in this country that felt very hopeful in terms of direction. And it hurts. It really hurts me to be standing and feeling like I can't really support the first woman who's likely to be a candidate for president. I would like to be able to do that, but boy, are they making it hard. They're making it very difficult for me and millions of other women to do the same.
Donna, I have a quick question. Rob at the World Herald. Sure. What do you say to the argument? I mean, the Hillary folks are saying is that you are indeed disrespecting their votes that they cast in the primary, that she is their candidate, and that she gets the right to pick her VP, and that their voices are not being heard by you folks.
Well, I've heard it said over and over again that Hillary Clinton won this fair and square. We could go on for another hour about whether or not that's really true or not. And it's frustrating, it's difficult, it's angering. We have all sorts of issues about election integrity to clear up in this country. I think one of the things that bothered me most about the DNC through the primary process was that they did not protect the right of every Democratic voter to cast a vote. And they did not protect the right of us to have our votes counted properly. And so, as I said, we could go through whether or not there were whole lists lost in Brooklyn apartment complexes, or whether or not every California vote was counted appropriately, or whether or not some of our friends in the media, I don't want to single anybody out, but released information not only about a primary in California, but released the information about who was going to win the day before. I mean, these are things that signal that that fight was not fair. And the WikiLeaks documents and the emails that are coming out reinforce that. And I want to say these are not things that Bernie delegates were conspiring to come up with that the Clinton campaign or the DNC was doing. These are just confirming what we saw on the ground as volunteers, as workers, as poll watchers in states all across the country, where we tried so hard not to show favoritism. We didn't want Bernie to get favoritism. We just wanted every vote counted and every person to be able to vote. And the DNC should have protected that right for every Democratic voter.
So you don't believe that the majority of voters voted for Hillary in the Democratic
I don't think we know, and perhaps they did. Perhaps they did. But, you know, for me, if I were a candidate, it would be a very hollow victory indeed, in some ways, to win it with that question still hovering about how that win was achieved. You know, I believe that Hillary Clinton's an extremely intelligent woman. I have no doubt about that. And I would not argue about her intelligence or her capability to run this country. What I argue about and what I am concerned about is how we are being treated as fellow Democrats who are trying to have an open party that really embraces that we had 45% of Democratic voters. This is not a small percentage. 45% of Democratic voters voted for Senator Sanders. That's a significant number of people who embrace that agenda and that way of moving our party forward.
Yes.
Amy Goodman from Democracy Now! The Clinton campaign has indicated Tim Kaine will be shifting his vote or his position on TPP to be more in alliance with what Hillary Clinton has said, even as she has shifted her position. Do you have any indication of this? What has he done? What has he said about this?
Yes. The question is, the Clinton campaign has been emphasizing in recent days that Senator Kaine may imminently be shifting his position, indicating a shift of his position on the TPP. I'm reminded of, I think it was Mark Twain who said, it's easy to quit smoking. I've done it hundreds of times. In this case, we have concrete actions to go on. You know, we're so encouraged by the spinmeisters to do this existential interpretation of what someone's motivation or future plans may or may not be based on pledges or otherwise. But let's be empirical. What did he do? He was one of a dozen Democratic senators who voted for fast track, which was intended at the time to smooth the way, allowing now no amendments, to smooth the way for TPP, which, let's be clear, is a threat to democracy. It's a threat to democracy in this country on a whole host of issues. So if it were just a matter of rhetoric, these folks might just be stupendous. If it's just about promises, then Kaine may be stupendous. But let's remember, this is coming from a campaign headed by a former Secretary of State who reiterated that the TPP was the gold standard of international agreements. And now she's changed. And to believe that somehow she would be incapable of changing back again, I mean, I live near the Golden Gate Bridge. I'll take bids, you know. Yes.
Are you concerned at all that forcing a fight at a convention, protest the convention, could impact the outcome in November, could make it harder to lose something like that for the presidency?
Yeah, I'll respond and then ask Donna to respond as well. The question is there concern that by protesting at this convention, inside the convention hall, it might tilt the election against Secretary Clinton in the fall? One of the tremendous ironies is that the real threat, the largest threat to the election of Secretary Clinton rather than Donald Trump, we believe, there's substantial evidence, is by her embrace of a corporate vice presidential candidate who will be a sitting duck for the phony, racist, xenophobic, nativist populism of Donald Trump, who, like demagogues from time immemorial, has claimed to be for the little guy and the little gal, while actually aligning with the big money and, in this case, sometimes fascistic interests and mentalities. So I think that Secretary Clinton, rather than trying to blame us for exercising our First Amendment rights to respond to her suppressive tactics and her dive further towards corporate Wall Street, she ought to try to imbue her campaign, both on the convention floor and for the next few months, with genuine economic populism of a progressive variety, which would really be a change for her. Yes.
How could you work with KYW News Radio? You said that 88% of your members found Kaine not acceptable. Who was acceptable? And if you were going to mount this challenge, who would you be advocating you to be?
Well, just in sensing from so many conversations we've had with so many delegates, there certainly was enthusiasm for putting Elizabeth Warren on the ticket. There's no doubt. And Sherrod Brown as well, Secretary Perez as well. There was apparently a very different set of finalists from Secretary Clinton. We might be just about done. Is there any other journalists? Yes, excuse me. We're calling on, and I'll come to you next. Yes.
Well, just to quickly follow on that, do you need these people to say, yes, I will accept being drafted before putting their names in a nomination? Because I imagine some of these people might say, no, I support the ticket, I'm not interested in this.
Yes, the question is, do we need the consent, affirmative consent of a potential vice presidential candidate contender before putting their name into nomination? Reading the DNC rules, we do need a sign-off from that person. In 1968, from the convention floor, at that contentious convention, Julian Bond's name was placed in nomination, and he demurred, explaining that constitutionally he wasn't qualified because he was under 35 years old. And whoever we choose to nominate not only will consent, but will be over 35 years old, I can assure you. Yes.
Yes. Since 1988, the vice presidential nomination has always been as a acclamation vote, voice vote, even though there have been several times when there were other candidates who had petitions which would allow them to be put on the ballot. How are you going to react when they do it again this week?
The questioner is saying that since 1988, there's always been acclamation votes for the vice presidential selection of the presidential nominee. If I understand your question correctly. How would we respond if that happens again? Well, first, we intend, if this does go forward, and you'll know more tomorrow at our briefing at 10:30, we intend to go through all of the rules to dot all the I's and cross all the T's of the DNC regulations. And if the party, the DNC, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, want to indicate that they've turned over a new leaf after the exposure of their emails, then they can certainly follow the letter of the rules, but we intend to hold them to those rules. I think we're all set. I look forward to seeing you at the briefing tomorrow, and thanks very much for being here.
One last thing. I am from Colorado. I am not a delegate. Wanted to make sure you all knew that.